Mr. Gerber back here. So we're looking at today how religion shapes the landscape. So far we've covered kind of what the definitions of certain religions are and then kind of the background and diffusion of a lot of the big religions. And so today we're looking at more of how we shape the actual physical landscape, which is part of that cultural landscape that we've talked about so far when we go back to the culture chapter. So this is going to kind of expand on that, but also think about, in the ways in which religion impacts the actual physical environment and the effects that that has. All right. So in class, this is going to be something we're going to look at is kind of thinking like famous sites or buildings that are tied to religion within these various ports, and how we shape the perception of our locations. Because typically we don't really think about this, but in many cases we tie in a lot of actual religious architecture to a lot of the most famous places on the planet as kind of a visual draw into the culture and to the actual location. Because when people think about Rio de Janeiro, there's probably one or two sites that really come to mind that people are aware of. Same thing within Jerusalem, within Rome, within Paris, within Mecca, that tie it in. Even here in Minnesota, we have a number of religious places that actually, perceptually people think about when they think Minneapolis, St. Paul, at least, how can we differentiate between the two of them? It comes down to landscape, and there is a religious tie into some of that too. Right. So for us to understand that, we need to understand that sacred structures such as holy sites, whether that be, temples, churches, mosques, and whatever, as well as, burial sites, pilgrimage sites, places, people visit, are anchors of the religion. And we have to think about, that tie into how religious groups are drawn or brought to certain places, or how certain places draw religious people. And that has a tie into both the ethnic and also the universalizing religions themselves. Right? All religions have some sort of structure that they use for either meeting spaces, for prayer spaces, or community spaces that bring them together. Right? So some of the examples here, it depends on the religion. Okay, it can be a place, right, such as for worship and meetings. Okay, we think churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, or for individuals, because places like Buddhist pagodas where they go and pray on their own and meditate. Hindu temples can also be for individuals, but also for group settings, are influenced by design by the religion and also the resources available. So when you think more historically, you think of places that were essentially created based on, what were the physical means that they could construct something around them. And even though I just realized this now, if you look up the mosque in Timbuktu that was created, during the the Empire of Ghana under Mansa Musa in the 1300s, it's still essentially a sand cement structure to this day. Especially even the ones in East Africa, and all the most historical mosques and sacred structures in Islam follow those patterns. Right? When you think about stuff for today's world, you think about more modern churches and locations, you can build them with a variety of different, building materials and have it look however you want. But back in the day, they all had sort of a certain feel to it, and that changes throughout time. All right? So, within the shrines, we have places where relics are stored, or aspects where the founder or other members did certain things. So what that ties in is the idea of what is considered to be important. And so people will visit these places because they believe that there is a cultural tie-in, because if somebody visited this place, or this was an important place for them, and so this is a place that we should go and visit. So when people go on pilgrimages, these are places that they will often visit because they think that they are important and they're tied to their spirituality or to their religion's history. So that ties in both universally and also the ethnic religions as well. With the ethnic religions, this is again being more with Judaism and Hinduism, but with universalizing religions, this can play in with Christianity, Buddhism, Islam as well. So it has those ties. We also think about place names, or places that are established for certain religious groups. So places, people are looking to expand their religion or to find religious safety and security. Utah for Mormons, Plymouth Colony, as we said, not necessarily religious safety, but again for certain religious expression for the Plymouth Colony for the Puritans, and just the overall place names that we'll come back to with toponyms. Right? We can also think about that as cemeteries or places for the dead. How do we bury, or how do we treat people that have gone on after their life has ended here on Earth? What are the burial practices? What are the rituals for when someone has passed on? All right, and that can be, again, examples of sacred structures, but also ties into, the spirituality in the physical world, but also into, the non-physical world beyond within the spiritual world. So you can even think, in a sense, mummies and pyramids in Egypt is a tie into religious structures. But also you think about that with, other types of cemeteries and other burial practices that we'll mention here later. And it also just ties a group to the location because they feel a sense of place, they feel a sense of connection that is really, really important to them. And one thing to really kind of place this, and this is a quote from one of my best friend's moms. And so, being a Jewish person, so I go to synagogue. And the synagogue I grew up in closed 8 years ago. So right as I was getting out of college, it was ending because membership was low. They didn't want to raise fees on everybody. There was damage to the place. There had been a pipe bursting a few years before then. And so just kind of a number of things that were kind of leading to, the closure of the location. And, she said this, and, I'm so glad I remember this quote because I really think that it's really important to understand when you have that connection to a certain location that really is the tie-in for you. All right, so that things always change, people pass on, new things come up, but you never think you're going to lose your synagogue. And you can replace that with church, temple, mosque, you even think that with other things too. You never think your high school is going to change. You never think that, your favorite restaurant's going to go. And, it's just kind of the thing that culture and everything else is always changing. And for me, it was like I never thought that my synagogue was going to go away. And the physical structure of the building is still there. It's changed. It's, found a new use. But you're always thinking like that's another place for a second home if you are, a religious person, if there's that connection there. For some people, that's really important. For others, not so much. And so, when you think about that just being just one synagogue, when there are so many available, or temples or churches, mosques, what have you, you think about that in terms of, for other really, really important religious sites that other people have that really tie them to the location, that really structure and anchor the religion to locations. Like the idea of Jerusalem for Christians, Jews, and Muslims, which we will refer back to kind of in the final sections of, this chapter, but also, with Mecca for Muslims, with, so many places like within the Ganges River and other places within India for the Hindu peoples. These are places that really have significant ties for them, or just even local places that are really important to these people, right? But also, religious structures and how they are, used for the landscape, and we'll, bring this up again, is not just for worship, but also just for the community that brings people together. And again, that's, a big thing for, all these other places. It's not just about a place of worship and a place for prayer and spirituality and meditation. It can also be a place where social services are provided. That includes education, where they learn the language. They might learn, about their cultural history. They might learn religious services and prayers and things like that. They might be able to trade goods. In many cases, that actually is what happens in many locations. It's kind of the center of the town or center of the region. All right, but also support like food and medicine in like things in shelters. Typically, churches and schools and community centers are typically the places people go to when there are floods and hurricanes and storms. These are set up to support large numbers of people, right? So in terms of the structures, okay, you get various different styles why the church, changes over time. Like here we have Notre Dame versus just, a low-key, I can't even see what I think that's a Baptist church. I honestly can't tell from this angle. But every church has its own architectural style. Catholic churches are, again, more exuberant, more or less on the outside for the most part. Protestant and Lutheran churches, because again, due to religious affiliation and the way they're administered, are very different in terms of structure. And again, a lot of it was based historically on what was available and what was being used at the time. So for Notre Dame, has that very Gothic style because it was made in like the 11 or 1200s. I think maybe even the 1300s before the Renaissance period. So they were using a very different style of what was considered important architecture at the time compared to the stuff that we see now. All right. And on top of that, churches were often, the center of the town. You think that it was the tallest and the most prominent building for a purpose to show and emphasize the importance of religion to the community, right? All the religious structures vary because of the resources available. Again, we've kind of mentioned that. So kind of some examples here within the Catholic churches, all right? So here we have, St. Paul's Cathedral here in Minnesota, right on John Ireland Boulevard in St. Paul. And honestly, when you're driving into St. Paul from the various locations, whether that is you're driving in from I-94 going east, west from Wisconsin, 52 north from Inver Grove. If you're going across 55 into, Minneapolis, Bloomington, Richfield area, and you're crossing the Minnesota River, you look right, you can see it. It's just this massive structure on top of the hill. And even though it's, fairly big sized building, it really draws the attention of what is there and why that's really, really important. Compare that with the Basilica, which has a similar, architectural style, but, is very different. But the fact is, it's not necessarily part of the Minneapolis landscape. There's a lot of buildings not shown in the background. I think that might have been edited out. But it's not as prominent as St. Paul's Cathedral, even though on the interior, they're, again, very similar in terms of, the pulpit up front, the way things are shaped, on things on the outside, in terms of, what's on the windows, stained glass, things like that. Compare that with a lot of the Protestant churches. So, I have I think this is the inside of Good Shepherd here in Inver Grove. I'm not sure, so I Googled it. I'm not sure if it looks like that on the inside. This is definitely what it looks like on the outside, and they vary, but typically you're always going to see something that says church. You're going to see a cross on the outside. That's going to signify that it's some sort of church, but again, it's not as exuberant or in these certain styles. And again, not all Catholic churches are like this, but the big ones in each, city are within those kind of frames. All right, and again, it changes based on your location and the time that it was built. Eastern Orthodox churches, so these are people predominantly from, Eastern and Southern Europe, so like Greece, Russia, Bulgaria, Romania, places like that. Again, you can kind of think very grandeur style, similar to the Catholic Church, but again, more of the domed structures, more of the gold pillars that are part of, again, the culture. Mormon churches, think Salt Lake City. I'm not sure if they are both. One of these is definitely Salt Lake City. I don't know if the other one is. In terms of like their grand temples and things like that, can't get a really good picture on the inside because there aren't any that exist that I'm aware of. But for mosques, it's a space for the community and meeting and prayer. You don't need a mosque for prayer, and it's not as important as a church. But again, the structures are very, very different. But you get minarets in big cities. This one is Dearborn, Michigan here. I don't remember exactly where this one is. And this is the inside of the Dearborn, Michigan, where people are praying. And so it's all kind of in that same direction. Compare that to the sense that, again, in terms of its structures of what's really important to the community, here are, 3 different ones here in Minnesota. This is part of the Plymouth Post Office. About 5 or 6 years ago, they had some extra space at the post office, and they sold that off in Plymouth to a local Islamic group, and they kind of set up in kind of an annex part there, and it's kind of a community center. Here's the Dar al Farouk Islamic Center in Bloomington, that if you know, and then here are the pictures, kind of like a little classroom thing. They have a gym space in there. I'm not sure what it was before, but if you've heard about it lately in the news, it's been brought up because that was where that group of homegrown terrorists went in and they tried to bomb and they did actually bomb the place a little bit on the inside. And so that case has been more current because they're now in trial now in November, December here of 2020. And then out here on the outskirts, or not the outskirts of Minneapolis, but on Riverside Avenue, about 1.5 miles away from TCF Bank Stadium. In this facility, this is where I went to my first Islamic gathering or introduction to the religion when I was at Augsburg, because it was right down the street a few blocks, and we attended a prayer service and met with some people. And it was right down the street. And you wouldn't think about that from the outside, or really from the inside, because again, you can set this up in any kind of structure. Not that important. Within Judaism, again, with synagogues, or also known as temples, they're not needed for prayers, but they do hold services, and they hold the most important thing, which is the Torah, the holy books, much in the same way that churches hold the Bible. And again, typically, while they are very different in terms of their styles, here are 4 of them. 3 of them from Minnesota. This was mine back in the day. Now it's actually changed a little bit because of its new uses. This is Bethel, right next to Benilde St. Mark. And if you kind of look, they're kind of similar to the shape of churches, especially here in Minnesota. This one's up in Virginia, Minnesota on the Iron Range. This one is in Madison, Wisconsin, more old school, more historic. This is Mount Zion in St. Paul. And again, you don't necessarily know that these are, synagogues, because for the most part, there's not a whole lot of actual things that would, change it from a church, except that there's no cross. With Mount Zion, you have, a menorah on the outside, right? On the inside, the structure is very different because you have a pulpit, but they're always in the direction of, of Jerusalem in terms of, where you're praying, the direction of everything. So the holy areas where you're praying is actually out this way, toward, at least here, it's out towards Jerusalem. Here it's pointed toward Jerusalem. Same thing with Mount Zion within those. So, yeah. Kind of running out of time here, but Hindu temples, again, not needed for prayers, but oftentimes you also have shrines. So this one here is in Maple Grove and the inside of it. This one more, I think, in India. But you can have personal shrines as well. So, yeah. And then we will come back to the sacred places in the next video.